Neil Gorsuch has been approved by the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary and is now headed for a full Senate vote, which will likely be held by Friday. By Friday, he will be confirmed as Associate Justice to the United States Supreme Court. The problem with Neil Gorsuch, and well, the problem with what's happening right now in the U.S. Senate, is that the Committee on the Judiciary basically approved him on a party line vote. All the Republicans voted for him, all the Democrats voted against him. And there are 52 Republicans in the U.S. Senate, 46 Democrats, and 2 independents, including Bernie Sanders. There are 4 Democrats that are going to... 3 Democrats that have announced that they're going to vote for him, and 1 Democrat that has announced that he's going to vote just for cloture for him. At the very least, that's what I've heard. So that means he'll get 56 votes, 56, maybe 57 if Angus King, the independent in the U.S. Senate, also votes for Gorsuch. That's below the 60 votes that he needs. Because here's the way it works in the U.S. Senate. For legislation and Supreme Court appointees, you don't need 60 votes for someone to be appointed, but you need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. What a filibuster does is it extends debate, and you need 60 votes to end the debate. That's called cloture. For now, it seems that the Republicans will get in total 57 votes for cloture on Neil Gorsuch. So you have 3 Democrats from red states, Indiana, North Dakota, West Virginia, along with the Democrat from Colorado, which is Neil Gorsuch's home state, and potentially Angus King, the independent from Maine, voting for cloture on Neil Gorsuch. That's not enough. You also need 60 votes to overcome a legislative filibuster, and it was the case that you needed 60 votes to overcome a filibuster on other political appointments, courts appointees, judicial appointees, cabinet appointees, all those kind of things. Until Harry Reid changed the rules in 2013 for Obama appointees, lower court appointees, cabinet appointees, because he was frustrated with the fact that the Republicans were slowing down the pace at which Obama could confirm political appointees, and in some cases even filibustering those appointees. So when it comes to what's happening right now in the Senate, it's exceptionally damaging because what Mitch McConnell is going to do in response to this, in response to the fact that he doesn't have the votes to overcome the filibuster, he's going to change the rules of the Senate. Now, the rules of the Senate can be changed by a simple majority, so you only need 50 votes. McConnell has them. He has them because if any Republican voted against Gorsuch, hell, forget about voting for Gorsuch. That's a guaranteed thing in the Republican Party. That was never in question for the Republicans in the Senate. If any Republican votes against the rule change, the activists, the grassroots of the Republican Party, the far right, the Tea Party, the Freedom Caucus, the donors, the Koch brothers, all that, they will rip their heads off if they try and do that. And a similar thing is happening with the Democratic Party, where for any Democrat that's voting for Gorsuch is being threatened for doing so, even if it's just to protect the institution of the Senate. Because, hey, who gives a damn about institutions? Let's go full-on partisan, because that's exceptionally smart. No, it isn't. You know, institutions are important in a democracy because they are designed to protect from extremely partisan politics. But the politics of the United States are so partisan, so tribal, that those institutions can no longer do their jobs. The moment Harry Reid changed the rules of the Senate is the moment partisanship won against the very institutions, the democratic institutions in the United States. And now Mitch McConnell, an institutionalist who doesn't want to do this, by the way, based on what I've read, is going to do it. Now, what's next? Well, Harry Reid, the scumbag that he is, because he's the one that created this entire situation. And hey, look, if you're someone that hates Trump and hates the cabinet appointees, I'd point out that somewhat close to half of his cabinet appointees, you know, the controversial ones, were appointed with a simple majority, not a 60-vote majority, just 50 votes in some cases, Betsy DeVos, because of the rules that Harry Reid changed. And it was a bad idea then, and it's a bad idea what McConnell is going to do right now. But the Democrats can't change course. The Republicans can't change course. You know, things are so drastic and radical in the United States with both parties. You know, each side sees the other as extremism. Each side is afraid of each other, literally afraid of each other. And if they fear each other. The Republicans fear the Democrats and vice versa. And you know, one of the big reasons I actually supported Donald Trump, beyond foreign policy, trade policy, all that kind of stuff, one of the big reasons I supported Trump is because he was the most moderate Republican that ran in the Republican primaries. I'm not kidding. There was no other Republican that was against regime change with the exception of Rand Paul. But even Rand Paul was not as moderate as Trump, because because Trump vowed that he would protect Medicare and Social Security, something Rand Paul would not promise. Hell, he even flirted with the idea of single-payer protecting Medicare, Medicaid, protecting Planned Parenthood. That's who Trump is. He was the most moderate Republican. And he won by being the most moderate Republican. And he's facing issues because of the far-right Freedom Caucus. So the reason I supported Trump, one of the big reasons I supported Trump, was I hoped he would drag the Republican Party more from the far-right Freedom Caucus more towards the center, towards what is the Main Street Partnership, the Tuesday Group. These are Republican caucuses, centrist caucuses within the Republican Party. That's what I was hoping for with Trump. The problem is that this resistance movement is preventing really any kind of bipartisanship between Democrats and Republicans. And that's obviously a big issue. Look, you know, neither side really wants to compromise. Not Republicans, not Democrats. So how long until, you know, going back to the Senate, how long until Mitch McConnell changes the filibuster on legislation? Therein lies a big question, a very big and important question. How long until Mitch McConnell succumbs to partisan pressure to change the legislative filibuster? Now, Harry Reid, the scumbag, said that if the Democrats had won the Senate, which they might have in the 2016 election, that they would have changed the rules on legislation. There you go. So, so I had hoped that Trump would, in a sense, prevent extreme partisanship. Clinton certainly would have created extreme partisanship from the right-wing Freedom Caucus and would have pushed the Republican Party even further to the right. But now you're seeing a very negative effect in the Democratic Party. And it's not like the Democrats can change course. It's not about Neil Gorsuch and his record. That's so irrelevant. But speaking about this record, he is a conservative originalist judge who is replacing the great Antonin Scalia. And I say great Antonin Scalia because regardless of how you view his decisions, Antonin Scalia was a superb Supreme Court justice. He was one of the best Supreme Court justices in recent memory. And there are obviously certain, there are decisions that many people disagree with, agree with, whatever. There are some things I do care about. Net neutrality, one of them. Antonin Scalia was one of the top 10 knowledgists on the Supreme Court while he served as an associate justice on the Supreme Court before he died. From The Atlantic, Antonin Scalia totally gets net neutrality. Now, this was in 2014 when the FCC under Obama was about to change the net neutrality rules. Initially, in a way that would have benefited the big internet service providers. On Thursday, the Federal Communications Commission proposed new rules to regulate broadband internet providers. The rules will effectively let big internet service providers like Comcast and Verizon create two tiers of internet speeds, a fast lane available to big content providers like Disney and Netflix and a normal channel that must adhere to commercially reasonable speed standards. Many supporters of an open web don't like these rules, and for bloody good reasons. The agency's suggested regulations, they say, will either sacrifice a key tenet of the internet, net neutrality, or prove ineffectual. They say the agency must recategorize broadband internet providers so that they become utilities, common carriers. It's obvious, they say, that the FCC categorizes broadband incorrectly in the first place. Turns out a member of the nation's highest ranking court made their case for them almost a decade ago. That judge's name, Antonin Scalia. That was an actual thing. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 on Brand X. It was okay that justices decided this was an old court case for the FCC to consider cable broadband an information service, which means Brand X didn't get what it wanted. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion. The case, as decided, he wrote, was less about wires and cables and more about the latitude which the U.S. courts give federal regulatory agencies. Thomas said Congress rules about what defined the telecommunication service versus an information service could be unclear, so the FCC got to interpret them. 2 decades before, the Supreme Court had ruled that the judiciary should let federal agencies interpret the laws authorizing them. In the Brand X case, Thomas extended this judicial deference. If a statute is ambiguous and if the implementing agency's construction is reasonable, then the court had to let the agency execute its own regulation, Thomas wrote. It had to do this even if the agency's reading differs from what the court believes is the best statutory interpretation. Alright. Justice Scalia disagreed. In an ardent defense, he was famous for his dissents. He wrote that the FCC's interpretation of the law around information services was implausible, with its decision to regard cable broadband as an information service. The agency had established a whole new regime of non-regulation which will make for more or less free market competition, depending on whose experts are believed. In ruling that broadband was an information service, the FCC had exceeded the authority given to it by Congress. Anyway, and on top of that, Scalia also did something else. Scalia's landmark defense of violent video games. Really. On June 27, 2011, he also delivered an opinion worthy of appreciation for those who love video games. Scalia wrote on behalf of the majority in a 7-2 ruling against the state of California's attempt to criminalize the sale of violent video games to minors, because we know that the Democrats really care about free speech. No, they don't. California was attempting to treat violent video games like cigarettes and alcohol, arguing that violent video games, unlike other forms of violent entertainment, could cause changes in children's minds and actions. Scalia and 6 other justices would have none of it, and instead affirmed that violent video games like movies, books, music, and all other art forms are speech and are protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So that's who Antonin Scalia was. Now, the question with Gorsuch is, will he follow the same path? I don't know. On the issue of free speech, he seems very strongly in favor of freedom of speech, so that's good. On the issue of net neutrality, I don't know. But really, that's a decision, arguably, for the FCC to make. And, people should remember something about the decision of the FCC under the Obama years. Because as per that Atlantic article, the FCC under Obama was more than willing to give the big ISPs what they wanted. It really was a concerted effort by activists and by companies like Google that really stood up to the FCC and stood up to the ISPs and really protested and viciously attacked the FCC for the rules that it was trying to implement, that caused the Democrats on the FCC to change their minds and adopt the current rules on net neutrality. And it probably will take such concerted effort to preserve them. Now, there are certainly some issues with the rules on net neutrality that were adopted by the FCC. Namely, that they weren't actually enforced. I mean, yeah, the rules are great, but they're irrelevant if they're not actually enforced. In Obama's FCC, they threw people a bone, said, oh, look at these great net neutrality rules, and then didn't enforce them. Now, the reason this is important in Gorsuch is that because going forward, there are going to probably be a lot of cases involving internet privacy, net neutrality, and computer technology, going forward to the Supreme Court. And there isn't a lot known about where Gorsuch stands on a lot of these issues. So we just don't know. We don't know where he stands. Scalia stood on the side. Scalia was a technologist. He stood for net neutrality. He stood for freedom of speech. Gorsuch seems to stand for freedom of speech, but we don't really know a whole lot about his stances on a lot of these issues. Though I guess you could argue that Gorsuch has some very big shoes to fill, quite literally, when it comes to replacing Scalia. But really, the whole fight between the Democrats and Republicans over Gorsuch is really kind of inconsequential. It is really inconsequential at the end of the day, because it doesn't change the balance of the court, as I said. And so, but it's going to have deep implications for the U.S. Senate going forward. And it's going to damage the Senate and possibly even the courts themselves, the Supreme Court themselves, because when you change the rules on appointing people to the Supreme Court, then you're not just damaging the institution of the Senate, you're damaging the institution of the United States Supreme Court. And that's exceptionally negative. But this is what happens following the most contentious election in recent US history. Costin here on Serious Gaming, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more. And if you like my content, please consider supporting me via PayPal and Patreon, especially as YouTube is moving towards instituting mass censorship at the behest of the advertisers on political videos.